Yeah,
On,
yeah,
sir.
it's on.
Okay, okay, fine.
Vinod, just let me know when to start.
1 minute.
Okay,
You can start your presentation now.
okay.
Share.
Is the first page of the PPT is visible with the title and my name?
Yeah, it's clearly visible.
Okay.
Just a minute. Just a minute. Just at 11 to exactly, you can start. One minute only.
No problem.
Yeah, I think you can start.
Yeah. Thank you, Vinod. Not sure how many have joined, but good morning, everyone, and good to meet you all virtually. As part of this webinar. Before starting, the webinar, let me give a brief introduction of myself. So, I'm Ramarao Kalakuntla, associated with Viatris, which is previously known as Mylan Pharmaceuticals, in a global audit team since about 4 years. And the core responsibilities include auditing of the GCP and GLP vendors for Viatris, both domestic as well as overseas. Prior to associating with Viatris, the current company, I had an experience with companies like Dr. Reddy's for about 3 years, and previous to that, I had a stint of 6 years at Access Clinicals, which is a CRO based in Hyderabad. And prior to that, I had a very short stints with Ranbaxy and Apotex Bangalore. And coming to my academic background, I'm a postgraduate in pharmaceutical sciences with a doctorate in biotechnology. Yeah, I think that's a brief introduction of myself. Vinod, my audio is clear, right?
Yeah, I mean, your voice is clear, audible.
Okay. So whenever, during the course of webinar, if there is any interruption, just stop me there so that we can see the technical glitches,
Yeah, yeah,
because we are all joining virtually. There is
yeah.
always a possibility that we may experience some technical glitches.
Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So to start the presentation, I mean, so the topic which I chose was the internal and external audit management from an industry perspective. So let me go into this. Before starting the presentation, a standard disclaimer. It states the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the individual presenter and may not be attributed to the presenter's organization. So these are just thoughts and the experience what I have been gained during over the years. So the practices may not be exactly been attributed to the organization where I am working or previously worked. So these are the brief contents of the next I think 45 minutes. It covers the various audit types which a sponsor company is generally engaged from a clinical research standpoint. And once the audits are done, how the audits are reported and how the corrective and preventive actions are being managed. And I also thought to touch base on the data integrity, which is probably one of the very burning aspect in a pharmaceutical industry. And the later part of the presentation covers, because of this COVID-19, we had a very different experience and the travel challenges since last 1.5 year. And because of that, we not only we, every sponsor company was forced to manage the audit strategy from on-site audits to remote audits. So the last part of the presentation covers the details of on-site audits and the remote audits, and what are the advantages and disadvantages for the remote and on-site audits. So what is an audit? So as I said, because this presentation exclusively talks from a clinical research point of view. So for a clinical research, the golden standard guidance is ICH, good clinical practice, and the current version is E6R2. So in section 1.6, it states audit is an independent, systemic and independent examination of trial related activities and documents to determine whether the evaluated trial related activities, so the red color text is important, were conducted and the data were recorded, analyzed and accurately reported according to the protocol, sponsors SOPs, good clinical practice guidance and the applicable regulatory requirements. So the guidance also states in section 5.19.3 the responsibilities of the sponsor. So the sponsor should ensure that the auditing of clinical trials or systems is conducted in accordance with the sponsor's written procedures. So sponsor has a privilege to decide what to audit, how to audit, and the frequency of audits, and the form and content of the audit reports. So the guidance is, give the onus to the sponsor for managing the audits. So when I said, from a sponsor point of view, what are the typical audits? Generally, a sponsor either experience or manage themselves. So it includes, the regulatory audits, internal audits, and external audits. So regulatory audits are being conducted by the regulatory agencies, the country specific regulatory agencies. If we see an example, if for example in India we have a CDSCO, and the US has a Food and Drug Administration, which we typically call it as US FDA. So the United Kingdom also has the MHRA, Ministry of Health, and I'm not sure the full form. And similarly, the European Medical Agency also conducts the audits. And we have examples, typically the pharmaceutical industry experience the audits from Anvisa Brazil, ANSM France, and the Ministry of Health Turkey. So these are just a few examples of international regulatory agencies where an audit is expected from a sponsor company or a clinical research organization. So why the regulatory agents do an audits? What is the purpose of those audits? So the first one is, like, whenever a facility is first built, in certain instances we need to get a local regulatory agency approval. For example, if a new clinic contract research organization is started, so before initiating any studies, they need to get a CDSCO approval stating that the facility is good to conduct the clinical studies. So that is facility approval audits. And the couple of other audits, like whenever any sponsor company submits either new drug applications or ANDAs or biological license applications. So before approving the respective dossiers, the international regulatory agencies will most probably come for an audit of that particular organization to evaluate the compliance to their defined requirements. The third one is routine surveillance inspections. This may be by the local agencies or the international agencies as per their own the standard practices. The other one is FERCOS audits. Whenever there is a specific non-compliance is noticed or any complaints from any of the whistleblowers, so the regulatory agents also conduct a FERCOS audit. I mean, previously the audit type used to be on site, but because of this COVID-19 pandemic, the regulatory agencies are also started doing a remote audits. And once the audits are conducted, so every agency has their standard practice of reporting the audit outcome. We mostly, in an industry, we hear that somebody received a 483. So it is a typical practice of US FDA, which issues a form 483 at the end of audit, listing all the non-compliance issues observed during those audits. And similarly, every regulatory agency has their own standard practices of reporting the audit outcome. So comes to the internal audits. So the regulatory audits are typically conducted by the regulatory agencies, but sponsor companies or the CROs has to host that audit and manage that. So the other two types of audits, internal audits and external audits, these are the audits to be managed by the sponsor company or a contract research organization. So if you see internal audits, so these audits are performed by the internal team of the organization, whether a sponsor or a CRO, and the audit team should be independent of the operation. So this is a very important aspect which the regulatory agencies will definitely verify during any of their audit, whether an organization has a quality assurance team or any other compliance monitoring team which is independent of the operations, and whether they are independently being monitoring and auditing the activities of the operations team. So during these audits, if needed, a subject matter expert may be part of the audit team. So why a subject matter expert is needed? Because the audit team, which mostly involves the team from the QA, they may not be having a vast knowledge on all the domains. So for that particular segment, if you are doing any typical audit where if the audit team feels that if we may not have a sound understanding of the principles and practices, if we request a subject matter expert who is the subject matter expert is a person who is having thorough knowledge on the specific subject, so who can assist the audit team during the internal audits. And coming to the audit type again, on-site or remote, it depends because of COVID-19. As I said, the strategies have been changing. And once the internal audit is conducted, the audit report to be issued to either the management or the designee of the management. And when an audit report is issued, the operations team or the auditee is expected to provide the corrective and preventive actions to the audit report, so that the non-compliances noticed during the internal audit has to be addressed. The third type of audit is an external audit, which is performed. Again, it is performed with the sponsor, QA team or the compliance team. These audits are performed to evaluate the vendors and the service providers. So if any company, whether it is a pharmaceutical company or a contract research organization, they definitely have to have the different vendors providing either the materials or the services. So we have to, the regulatory expectation is we should define a quality management system which describe how do we select the vendor and how do we evaluate the vendor, whether the vendor is meeting the intended requirements of the sponsor. So that is the most important thing while evaluating the external vendors. So again, these audits are mostly performed with the QA team, and as I said, the role of subject matter expert may be required if for a specific services. And again, these type of audits are either on site or remote. And again, the audit report to be issued after internal approval. So once whether it is a internal audit or an external audit, generally it is expected that whatever been the findings categorized during the audit required to be categorized, whether the findings or observations or non-compliances noted during the audit are critical, are major or minor. These are one type of uh, categorization being followed in the industry. There are some other examples, or other categorizations are also been in place. And if required, we may mention that some of the observations noted may not be an observation, it is just for a recommendation or an opportunities for improvement. So during this presentation, the definitions of what is considered to be a critical or major or minor for a clinical research system, or from a good clinical practice point of view. So I have referred this EMA guidance issued in 2014, and the next slides definitions of these categorizations are based on this particular guidance reference. So as I said, critical observations. What constitute a critical observations? So the guidance states whenever the conditions, practices, or processes that adversely affect the rights, safety, or well-being of the subjects and or quality and integrity of the data. So the most important thing is, if any of the observation noted is impacting whether the rights, safety, or well-being of the subjects, because in a clinical research, the subject's rights and the safety is most important among all other aspects. And whenever any observation is having an impact on the quality of the data, so that particular observation can also be categorized as a critical observations. So generally, critical observations are considered totally unacceptable, and possible consequences may be rejection of data and or legal action required. So if a regulatory agency finds issues a critical observation, so definitely there is a potential possibility that the agency may not accept the data or a dossier from the specific company, and if required, a legal action is also being initiated. So the observations categorized as critical may include a pattern of deviations classified as major, bad quality of the data, and or absence of source documents. Manipulation and intentional misrepresentation of data belongs to this group. So these are just a few background information. What may be the conditions the observation may be categorized as critical. So the next one is a major observations. So what constitutes a major observations? A major observations is a conditions, practices, or processes that might adversely affect the rights, safety, or well-being of the subjects and our quality and integrity of the data. So in the previous critical observations, it is confirmed that it is going to adversely affect the rights and the integrity of the data. Whereas in a major observation, if there may be chance that it may not affect or it might affect, so in those instances a major observation is categorized. Major observations are serious findings and are direct violations of GCP principles. So the possible consequences, again, data may be rejected and are legal action required. So the word in the difference between critical and major is where there it is confirmed, whereas in major observation it may be impacted. The observations classified as major may include a pattern of deviations and are numerous minor observations. So the next categorization generally used is a minor observations, which the definition indicates the conditions, practices, or processes that would not be expected to adversely affect the right, safety, or well-being of the subject and are the quality and integrity of the data. Again, the possible consequences are observations classified as minor indicate the need for improvement of conditions, practices, and processes. So these minor observations, generally the people may take it as they may not take it seriously, because these observations are generally minor in nature, and they may not expect any legal action or rejection of the data, and there is always a possibility to improve the practices and procedures. So many minor observations might indicate a bad quality, and the sum might be equal to a major finding with its consequences. So in some of the cases, if during an audit, if you find more than 10 minor observations, then there may be a indication that even though each observation, when it is seen from an individual impact, it may be minor, but if there are numerous observations of the same minor categorization, so that may be considered as a major finding, and the consequences needs to be evaluated. So the most important thing before categorizing any of the observation is the impact of the observations needs to be evaluated, whether this particular finding has an impact on the right, on the subject safety and well-being, or on the quality and integrity of the data. So once the audit is performed, and the next thing is that we need to prepare an audit report and the kappa to be evaluated. So for reporting the audits, generally the audit report is issued by the lead auditor to the management, and the corrective and preventive actions are to be provided by the audit team. Whenever an audit report is issued to the auditee is expected to provide a corrective and preventive action with a detailed timelines, by when the corrective and preventive actions are expected to be completed. So once the corrective and preventive actions are received by the auditor, so the audit team will review the kappa, and whether they evaluate whether the kappa is acceptable, or any further discussion is needed. So the another most important thing is, once the kappa is accepted, for example, if a company states, because of some reasons for a finding, they stated that they are not going to complete that particular observation, maybe within 15 days of an audit report issuance, they generally state a timeline that, for example, we will be completing by December 2021. So once we accept the kappa, we need to confirm whether by December 2021 that particular, either an internal team or a vendor, has completed that particular committed kappa or not. And once all the kappas are completed, so the kappa effectiveness check is another term which is being used in the industry in the recent years, which means that once the kappa is done and it is accepted, someone needs to evaluate whether the kappas which is being documented, whether it is effective, or still there are some issues with respect to kappa implementation. So that's probably the kappa effectiveness check. So as I said, because this particular talk is based from a background of the clinical research, so let's see what is the role of audits in clinical development. Mostly the clinical trials are outsourced, because a sponsor company which is developing a pharmaceutical product, or intended to submit a dossier to any of the international agencies, they need to conduct the clinical trials. The clinical trials include start from phase 1 to phase 4. In phase 1, most of the studies are conducted for a generic formulations as a BA/BE studies, and for the new molecules, phase 1 to phase 4 studies. So many of the sponsor companies may not have the in-house capabilities to conduct those clinical trials, so they need to be outsourced, and the role of audits is very important whenever any of the activity is being outsourced by a sponsor. So choosing a partner is very critical for the successful execution of the clinical studies. The partner or the vendor needs to evaluate it for both quality and compliance. It is always said that one size doesn't fit all. What is the meaning of this? Because, for example, if a vendor is evaluated for BA/BE studies, it doesn't, and that vendor is considered acceptable, it doesn't mean that the same vendor is good to give a green light for a late phase studies like phase 2 to phase 3 studies. So every scope of services needs to be evaluated in detail, and then the green light generally is being issued by the audit team. So that's the reason we state that one size doesn't fit all. So the typical vendor life cycle approach includes identification of the vendor. This is generally being performed by the we call it as
Hello, Ramaram. Hello, you are not audible.
hello,
Yeah, now it's okay.
I'm back, right? There
Yeah,
was a
yeah,
power cut.
yeah.
Identification of the vendor, which is being generally performed by the commercial teams, the other sourcing team. The terminology may vary, but this is generally been identified by the operations or the commercial team. Once the vendor is identified, the technical evaluation or due diligence is expected to be performed by the operations team, whether the vendor is able to provide the intended services or not. For example, if we have a bioanalytical method which needs to be analyzed, BAB study which needs to be performed using a LCM SMS system, or in specific the ICP OES methods. And if the vendor doesn't have the ICP OES, then the vendor may not be meeting the intended requirements of a particular study. So that technical evaluation needs to be performed by the operations team. And once the technical evaluation is done, then an audit is expected to be performed by the audit team. And once the audit is done, the vendor is approved, given a green light. Then once the study is initiated, it is expected that the study needs to be monitored. Again, it is generally performed by a separate team called monitoring team. They monitor the study on site, whether the study is being executing as per the defined study protocol and other relevant procedures and guidelines. And once the study is completed, the results are out. Then generally it is expected that a study specific audit or post study evaluation is expected to be performed. So once all this is done, then periodically this cycle will continue for the audit and other technical due diligence activities. So as we are talking about the clinical research and the role of audits in clinical research. So what are the typical vendors for clinical domain? So as I said, we have clinical CROs, and we generally categorize those CROs into a BAB study CRO, which was a phase 1 or BAB studies, and the other CROs which are offering the clinical trials like phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. And we also have investigator sites where typically the hospital sites where the studies are being executed, the late phase studies. And we also have labeling and packaging facilities. So if you see in a clinical for any clinical trial, and if there is a randomization, blinding and randomization needs to be performed, for performing those particular study specific labeling and packaging, we have a specific or companies which are providing these services, and they also distribute the labeled IMPs to the individual sites, investigator sites, as per the study specific requirement. And in the clinical domain, we also have non-clinical CROs. So these non-clinical CROs are those which are performing the non-clinical studies, mostly typically on the test systems include the animals, varying from rat to rabbit, and the microorganisms and other biological test systems. So as I said, the data integrity is one of the very important aspect required to be evaluated during any audit. So what is data integrity? The data integrity may be arising from a random issues or systemic issues. So what are those, how do we differentiate the random issues and systemic issues? If any of the concerns has been noted, for a data integrity concern, we need to evaluate whether this particular issue is only limited to one particular study or one particular activity, or it has been impact on multiple studies, and it is of systemic in nature, which is impacting whole lot of studies. If you if, if you see, if you remember, there was a definition of data integrity. What may be the reasons why a data integrity could be arise? So the data integrity may be because of poor quality system, which indicates that the quality system is not enough to manage or to uh, the execute the intended services, or it is because of an intentional manipulation. If somebody is doing an intentional manipulation, it is generally assumed that it may it is very difficult to find it out in one particular audit or during the audit of spanning for 2 days. So those issues which generally needs to be evaluated uh, with a reasonable longer duration of the audit. So again, as I said, data integrity, the definition here it is, data integrity is the degree to which data are complete, consistent, accurate, trustworthy, reliable, and that these characteristics of the data are maintained throughout the data life cycle. So these are the standard definitions from one of the guidance on data integrity from MHRA, which states that the data integrity is the degree to which data are complete, consistent, and accurate, trustworthy. And it also states the data should be collected and maintained in a secure manner so that they are attributable, legible, contemporaneously recorded, original or a true copy, and accurate. So you might have heard about the words like Alcova and Alcova Plus. So the previous data integrity principles include Alcova, which are, it starts with A, attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. And nowadays, because of the various issues, the practices of Alcova Plus are also in place. What is the other plus indicates? So the data is expected to be complete, consistent, enduring, and available. So this is typically, the Alcova Plus is the current industry standards for ensuring the data integrity aspects. So how do we prevent and how do we detect and prevent the data integrity issues? It is expected that during any audit, or either internal or and external, it is expected to identify the weakness, and once the weakness is identified, we should the vendor or the operations team should strive to improve the level of compliance. The level of compliance is improved through strategic planning and process automation. And the process automation also includes strengthening of the computerized systems. It is expected that the automation and computerized systems are the most important controls if put in place to control the data integrity aspects. So this is a typical life cycle approach. Again, any issues to be detected, it has to be responded, and we should learn from those issues what are the mistakes, and we should also try to prevent those issues from reoccurrence. Okay, I think the second part of the talks was more on remote audits and on-site audits. So in a pre-COVID-19 scenario, the standard methodology for the audit include on-site audits, and those on-site audits include both domestic and international audits. So this is a typical process flow of an on-site audit. So it starts with audit notification by issuing a audit notification defining the scope of audit and the tentative dates for the audit. Once the audit notification is issued, generally we initiate a pre-audit request. The pre-audit request also typically contain a questionnaire asking the vendor to provide us the detailed documented information about a specific scope of services and as well as the practices being followed. And the third step involves travel arrangements. If the audit is expected to be out of city, then we need to make a travel arrangement. And if it is international travel, so there is an administrative aspects of obtaining a visa and other the travel and stay arrangements needs to be confirmed. So on the day of audit, generally the audit will start with an opening meeting, and this opening meeting will be conducted with the audited team and including their management as well. Once the opening meeting is done, generally a tour of the facility is being performed to see the all the technical areas associated with this particular scope of services. And after facility tour, generally, the auditors will spend time on document review and interviews. So these interviews will include representatives from the various functions, and during this interview the audit team generally evaluate the understanding of the personnel with respect to their own standard operating procedures and the practices which are followed by them. So at the end of an audit, a typical closeout meeting is being conducted, again with the auditing management. And during that meeting, any of the concerns noted during the audit shall be discussed with the auditing management. Once the closeout is done and the audit team is back to their own office, generally an audit report is issued within a defined timelines as per this audit, sponsor specific procedures. So as I said, that was a typical on-site audit process flow and the on-site audit methodology in a pre-COVID scenario. But once we had this pandemic outbreak in I think March 2020, so all the travel restrictions were in place, and no flights have been operated, no travels were being performed. So then the question comes, how do we manage the audits? Because of this COVID-19 scenario, we all experienced the lockdowns and the travel restrictions were placed. Even the vendors are not allowing any of the new personnel to their site, and we all listening a new word called new normal, which is something, the conditions have been changed considering to the previous normal. So then that the remote audits is the concept which is being most widely being used during post COVID-19 scenario. So these remote audits are not new, but because of this COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, which has been become the only choice. So for this remote audit, we need to adapt new techniques to accomplish the effective vendor management due to COVID-19 pandemic, and that's the reason the remote audits are in place. So we were forced to change the audit methodology from on-site to audit. And generally the remote audits can be conducted by two types. One is a desktop audit, which is generally less preferred. So we will come to know why it is less preferred. And the other one is, we call it as virtual audits. And as I said, these remote audits are not new. We used to have performed these remote audits previously as well, but the very less number of remote audits. Earlier it was one of the option to choose, but now unfortunately it has become the only option to perform the audit remotely. So as I said, the remote audit can be conducted by two types of audits. One is a desktop audit and one is virtual audit. The desktop audit is generally this is the typical process flow of desktop audit. It again start with audit notification, pre-audit request, and after pre-audit request, there may not be any an on-site visit or a virtual meeting. So the audit team is expected to review the document remotely, and once the review is completed, generally a meeting is arranged for any query resolution, or if the meeting is not possible, we need to perform this query resolution through email communications. And once all this been done, we expect to have a discussion with the auditing management and discuss any of the potential concerns noted during the desktop audit. And again, an audit report is also issued for a desktop audit. So why this is less preferred is because we during a desktop audit, we have a very limited information about the particular vendor, because the documents are only reviewed and there were no interactions with the vendor. So again, one of the most preferred remote audit approach is a virtual audit approach, which involves, this is a typical process flow, and this process flow is reasonably similar or matching to the on-site audit. So it again start with audit notification, pre-audit request, and this is one important thing during the virtual audit is pre-verification of the technical platforms. For example, if we are using, we are using Google Meet for this particular webinar, we need to confirm whether this particular a platform is mutual, is working well for both the parties, because every company has their own IT infrastructure. And we could have heard that some of the people are not using Zoom because of various aspects. So we need to confirm with the vendor whether the technical platform which is being used is acceptable and it is also being accessible to them. So once that is done, on the day of virtual audit, a virtual opening meeting is conducted with all the audit team and the management. And the important thing in the virtual audit is we generally expected to have a virtual facility tour. So this virtual facility tour is only possible because of the technical advancements, because nowadays we have various technical platforms, either Google Meet or Microsoft Teams or Zoom, so that they can throw any instrument or device, they can take us through the live tour of their facility. And once that is done, again the document review and interviews have been performed with the audit team virtually to understand their practices and systems. At the end of the virtual audit, again a virtual closeout meeting is conducted with the audit management to discuss any of the concerns. And again an audit report is issued for the virtual audit as well. So now here comes what are the, because we have seen on-site audits and remote audits. So what are the pros and cons for on-site audit and remote audits? So always the pros for the on-site audit are many, because we can see the facility tour with our eyes, because we can see what we all want to see. And we have an opportunity to have face-to-face interactions in an on-site audit. And the most important thing is we can see the body language of the auditee. Whenever if we ask some question, we can definitely see, the body language is one of the factor which gives an impression whether the information shared by the auditee is true or it is being just a manipulated information. And the on-site audit is generally very quick. We used to be conducting this in 2 to 3 days, and this on-site audit is completed within vendors working hours, so there is no impact of time zone. So why this has been so important? If for example, last week we were working with a Japan vendor audit. So during that audit, because of the time differences, we only had 4 to 5 hours in a day to manage both the time zones, because I think they are 3.5 hours ahead of us. So if we start early in the morning, it's almost afternoon time for them. So this is one of the very challenge advantage. If we do an on-site audit, we can do this audit in their time zone. And it is expected that during an on-site audit, less vendor resources are required, because generally 1 or 2 persons are identified as audit coordinators, and they will only manage the audit during with the coordinate with the auditors. And during an on-site audit, we have an opportunity to challenge their systems and procedures to confirm whether they're actually executing what they've been defined in their procedures, RSOPs. And if a translation is required, so during an on-site audit, it is considered that it is reasonably easy to manage the translations. And we also have an advantage of an on-site audit. We can understand various acceptable industry practices. We call it as doing things differently. And the other most important thing is, during an on-site audit, it is reasonably easy to identify the data integrity issues. Last but not the least, so during an on-site audit, if we have an opportunity to travel to different states in India or different countries, so we always have an opportunity to know their cultures and traditions. So these are all the pros, but are there any cons for the on-site audit? Are there any disadvantages? Yes, there are some disadvantages as well, because the auditors needs to spend time in traveling, and the money is always been associated with the travels and the hotel stay. And the work-life balance may be impacted, for the auditors if the on-site audits are too many, conducted in a month. Having said that, so we have seen the advantages and disadvantages of an on-site audit. So what are the advantages of doing a remote audit? So the remote audits, during a remote audit, so documents can be accessed well in advance, because during a remote audit, we generally request the audit team to share the access to their documents well in advance, because it's very challenging to review the documents and conduct the interview at the same time. And it is less disruption to the vendor staff in lab and other areas. Yeah, this is another advantage. So during, if it is an on-site audit, we generally go for a facility tour, and the people who are working in the laboratory area may be disturbed. But if it is a remote audit, we were only seeing virtually, so they may not be disturbed with their general activities. And these remote audits save travel time and money to the organization. And the work life balance is expected to be managed because we are all working from home, and there won't be any visa challenges, and there won't be any food issues. So this visa challenges is very one of the important thing. For example, if you want to plan an audit to some of the countries like um, third world countries, getting a visa within time is a very challenging aspect. So looking into the advantages of the remote audit, so there was disadvantages as well, and the list is long list. So the disadvantages of remote audits include, these audits are usually longer than on-site audits, because we need to cover more days to cover the scope of activities, and the more vendor resources are needed. A team is required to support a remote audit, because if we ask for one document, somebody needs to scan it, and then somebody share to us through a electronic platform. It's a time taking process to get the requested documents, because they need to scan and upload the documents. The technical challenges in accessing the vendor documents due to local IT policies, and there are time zone limitations. So as I said, because whenever we are working, if we want to do an international vendor audit, we have to consider the time zone limitations as well. And during the facility tour, so we can only see what they want to show us. So, and some of the vendors are also showing the pre-recorded videos. Whenever the facility is managed well, they shoot a video and they just share that particular video during every audit. And the systems and procedures may not be challenged to test the actual execution, because we are doing it virtually. And the other aspects include the inability to access the body language of the auditee, and it is difficult to use, considered difficult to use a translated. And the language accent is one of the very important aspect. If we are talking through any of the electronic platform, it is reasonably difficult to understand the language accent of people from some of the countries. And some of the vendors are asked us to sign additional confidential agreements for a remote audit. And it is also considered that it is challenging to gather evidences for any potential concerns. And it is considered that it is reasonably difficult to identify the data integrity issues during a remote audit. So as we have seen, the remote and on-site audits, which has been managed in the post COVID-19 scenario. So what is the regulatory landscape for the remote audits or inspections? So the fact is that regulatory authorities are also adapting to the new normal, and some of the regulatory authorities already initiated risk-based remote audits and inspections, and some of the guidances are also being issued for the remote audits. So these are just a snapshot of a couple of guidances. One of the guidance is from US FDA. So they issued in April 2021 that how do they manage the remote interactive evaluations. And again, these are some of the guidances examples for remote audits for EMA. So I think moving forward, once it is expected that this COVID-19 impact may be there for a couple of years. So how do we move forward? And to answer that, so the question comes: are the remote audits are viable or acceptable? So these audits are seems to be viable and acceptable because of the technological advancements. And to have the remote audits acceptable, we need to define the quality management system to withstand the regulatory scrutiny. And it is always expected that to start the remote audits, first we need to perform a mock audits to test the practices for remote audits. Having said that, if we compare both remote and on-site audits are most effective compared to the remote audits. However, on-site audits are still the preferred methodology for following scenarios. So for example, if you're evaluating a vendor for the first time, we need to, the standard expectation is to perform an on-site audit. And if an audit is required because of any for cause reasons, then in that scenario, on-site audit is recommended. And if there are any risk based audits, and if the risk is high to medium, on-site audit is always expected. So in what cases we may consider remote audits? So the remote audits may be considered for reassessment audits. If you are auditing a vendor for a second or third time, we may consider a remote audit. And some of the audits are with a limited scope. So in that particular scenario also we may consider remote audits. And if the risk based scenario, if the risk is low, we may consider remote audits as well. And in some scenarios we generally have very tight timelines, and if the audit is very urgent, so we may consider to do a remote audit initially, and in that particular case an on-site audit can be performed later. I think with this I come to the end of my presentations, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, students, it's your time.
I think I'll stop presenting my screen.
Hello, sir. Good morning, sir.
Yeah, very good morning.
Sir, what are the opportunities for pharmaceutical analysis students in QA departments in industry?
I mean, in my opinion, QA is definitely a mixed. The QA team consists of mixed educational background. It may be from quality assurance, it may be from analysis, or it may be from pharmaceutics. It depends on their individual requirements. But pharmaceutical analysis students are equally considered for QA with their knowledge in analysis. With the technical knowledge in analysis.
Okay, any others? From first
Hello,
years.
sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Sir, whenever it is audit is in online, virtually, how can we find that whether they are genuine or not, sir?
Yeah, that's the most challenging part for a remote audit. So we need to conduct, because that's the reason the desktop audit is generally a less preferred option. And during the virtual audit, we need to have an interactions with them. We have to take a best judgment whether there's whatever they're been sharing is genuine, or is there any manipulation. That's again that's what, as I said, it's a challenging part in the remote audit.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, next. Any others from QA department? From QA department, anybody?
Good morning, sir.
Very good morning.
Sir, what is the escalation process in auditing, sir?
Yes, so the escalation process involves generally after issuing an audit report, and they provide a corrective and preventive actions. If the audit team is not satisfied with the the kappa response, then we generally have a discussion with them one more time, and if still the issues are not resolved, it will go to the next level. When I say next level, if it is an internal audit, to the management level, and if it is external audit, both the managements of both the sponsor company as well as the CRO. So this is after receiving the response. But during the audit itself, if there is a potential concerns are observed, like this audit is not required because there are significant quality non-compliance, then immediately the audit team escalates their own management, so that whether an audit to be continued, or we can discontinue and disqualify the vendor.
Okay, okay, sir. Thank you. Sir, what are sponsor audits, sir? Or they similar to normal audits?
I did not get you. Sponsor audit means? Okay. So if you're talking from, if for example, that's a vendor audit. For example, there is a CRO and the sponsor wants to conduct a studies in that particular scenario. If the CRO is auditing that particular vendor, the CRO people call it as a sponsor audit. And if the audit is from regulatory agencies, they call it as a regulatory audit. It's just a terminology.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
As the main theme of these regulatory agencies is for ensure quality and safety. So these on virtual audits will meet up these regulation requirements as per your idea.
I mean, because as we do not have any other choice, somebody said the world has to move on. We have to move on. If there is no COVID-19, probably Vinod could have arranged this seminar on site. We can talk to each other physically, but because of the restrictions, we are forced to, not only the sponsors, the regulatory agencies are also forced to adapt to the new approaches, and that approach is a remote audit. As you rightly said, we may not be 100% guaranteed that a remote audit is the only, once we do the remote audit, they can give the straight away clearance to the any particular company. Once it's based on risk assessment. So during the remote audit, if they find it is reasonable to give the clearance, they do that. If not, they definitely wait for a on-site audit. It's all based on the risk assessment what they observed during the audit.
Sir, can I ask a question apart from this topic?
Sure.
Sir, as I saw your LinkedIn profile, I got some doubt. No, sir, not doubt. I want to know how the uh, sorry, initial part of experience in your industry, as you completed Master of Pharmacy in Sutics, and later you did in bioanalytical, and later part you shifted quality assurance. So, what are the challenges you faced, sir?
Yeah. When we are freshers, probably we want to go to some particular field, but we may not have a choice, or we may not have an opportunity when we are freshers. So sometimes the destiny drives. So as I get an opportunity in bioanalytical, I just joined in Runback C and spent couple of years there. Later I thought, it's good to be for me to be in quality assurance rather than bioanalytical. Then I moved to the quality assurance, and probably from there on I am continuing in quality. And to answer your second question, so see, whenever everybody is how experienced they are, just remember that they are also started as a fresher at one particular day. So we have to learn the systems and procedures wherever we got an opportunity, and we have to be get associated with the senior colleagues and just adapt to the industry practices. I think that's the way we should go on.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I think Vinod, we are on time,
I
so
think
it's 11:58.
anybody last one option, I mean one chance. Anybody is there? If you want to clarify your doubts, you can. Otherwise, I'm going to close this session with final wording. I think nobody is coming up. Okay, no problem. Sainath, do you want to ask anything?
Yes, sir. Last one question.
Yeah, ask.
Sir, as as a regulatory affairs department plays a crucial role in getting the post marketing approvals or marketing approvals.
Yeah.
So why can't freshers get more chance in regulatory affairs? So there are not at all even a small number of vacancies in regulatory affairs.
I'm not sure, but
So
there are definitely every department needs all type of people. Starting from fresher to experienced. Uh, Definitely, there are vacancies for regulatory as well. I'm not sure why you did not find in particular time zone, but as I said, every department or every function, you know the industry, like the activities are generally distributed. Like some of the activities, if it is something to be expected by a fresher, why a company spend more money on an experienced person? So definitely there is a scope for freshers as well in the regulatory.
okay, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, okay, okay. Thank you very much, Ramarao, for your session on these audits. Especially, I mean, you have enlightened the observations like critical, major, minor, because of course we have dealt in class, but not this much depth. And apart from that, how to open the audit and closing, reporting, and especially the pros and cons of remote audit and the on-site audit. And even I have one query. I mean, this is related to queries. As an employee, which type of audit you prefer, and as an auditor, which type of audit you want to plan. I think you have vast experience as an auditor also. We have done many internal audits in different countries like China, US, and other countries also you have visited, and you have done audits. So as an auditor, which type of audit you prefer, and as an employee, which type of audit you face that is easy.
Yeah, as an auditor, definitely an on-site audit is preferred because, I mean, for the various reasons, as I enlightened, like, the advantages of on-site audits.
Yeah.
And obviously, as an employee, every company wants to, get ahead with the audits. So they definitely prefer a desktop audit or a remote audit rather than an on-site audit.
Okay, fine, fine. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for your time and for engaging our students
Yeah.
in this
Thank you, Vinod.
audit. And finally, I think
Thank you,
I
everyone.
want to
Bye bye.
share that I mean, he's my classmate in UG for 4 years. Not only classmate, he's my roommate. And thank you once again, Ramarao, for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinod. Good to see you after many years.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think.
Bye bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, students, I think it's a good session for you. I hope. Okay, then thank you all. Do you have any doubts? You can share. Otherwise, we can close this meeting. Okay, then.